Enid Blyton's Mystery and Adventure. The Ship of Adventure. Read by Stephen McGann.
This is amazing, said Lucy-Anne Trent, looking round.
The four children walked up the gangplank and onto their new home for the next 2 weeks, the cruise liner Erratica. I don't believe it, Philip breathed. 1 minute we're facing the most boring fortnight in history, the next we're here. How did we do it? Dinah pulled her new camera out of her bag and began snapping away. Behind the children, Alison Mannering, Philip and Dinah's mother, followed them up the gangplank. Although she was trying to hide it, disappointment was still etched across her face. This trip was supposed to have been her honeymoon. Alison should have spent the morning marrying Bill Cunningham, but the wedding had been called off. Bill worked as a special agent for the Foreign Office and had been called away on an emergency. The children had taken Bill's place on the cruise at the last moment.
All aboard! All aboard!
Snapped Kiki, Jack's white sulphur-crested cockatoo, from her position on his shoulder. Come on, everyone, let's go and find our cabins, yelled Jack. The boys soon found theirs. Kiki hopped from Jack's shoulder and flew from chair to bed and back again, calling excitedly. Then a blast from the foghorn and the sound of engines told the boys that they had set sail, and they dashed to the porthole to look out. Water churned, seagulls wheeled above. Yes, they were off! Dinah poked her head round the boys' door. Come on, you two! Stop admiring the view! Haven't you even unpacked yet? We want to explore! In high spirits, the four children swayed and staggered down the corridors. They were still finding their sea legs. The first port of call was the dining room. Inside, setting the tables, was a lively-looking young woman with a long brown ponytail. She looked up and smiled at the four as they came in. "Hello, you lot," she said. "Are you hungry? Dinner won't be for another hour, I'm afraid." Dinah laughed. "We're fine," she said. "We're just finding out about the ship." "Well, I'm Ingrid. Who are you?" "I'm Dinah, and this is my brother Philip. And I'm Jack, and this is my sister Lucy-Anne." "Pleased to meet you all," said Ingrid. "I'm your stewardess." "That's very pretty," said Dinah, pointing to the oblong of engraved silver hung round Ingrid's neck. "Thank you. It's a family heirloom. That's ancient runic writing." The children were still admiring the necklace when Alison came looking for them. "I hope they haven't been bothering you," said Alison. "Come on, you lot. Go and finish your unpacking." The children said goodbye and headed off to their cabins. Halfway across the world, hidden behind tall trees and locked iron gates, was the luxurious headquarters of supervillain Leon Slade. Inside the building, Igor, Slade's huge and muscular henchman, trembled under the tirade of anger from his sinister-looking boss. Slade had spent the last few months searching for a rather strange item. He had ordered Igor to steal a number of small ship-in-a-bottles from museums around the globe. Hidden within one of the antique models was something very special, something worth millions. The problem was finding the right ship in a bottle. So far, Igor had failed every time, and Slade was furious. "We've located another 2 of the model ships. The map has got to be in one of them," said Igor desperately. "But you said that last time. Why should I believe you now?" "Please, boss. We're so close. I can feel it." Slade moved in close to Igor. "I hope you're right," he murmured. "For your sake, I hope you're right. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" And he made a deadly gesture with his curved hand towards Igor's neck, like a scorpion about to strike. Sweat broke out on Igor's brow as he backed away. "Yes, boss," he stammered. "Just make sure you bring the boat to me," Slade rapped out. "The right boat." Back in London, life was not nearly so rosy as it was on the cruise. Bill Cunningham was sitting in the office of his boss, Sir George Houghton, listening to some bad news. "We've just had a report from our man in Africa," began Sir George. "Seems a gang of international gangsters is planning to furnish the guns to overthrow the government of Zimbabwe. Now, believe me, Cunningham, I am deeply sorry about the interruption to your wedding, but this situation is urgent. These gangsters have to be stopped before it's too late." Bill frowned grimly. "A scheme like that will cost a huge amount of money," he said. "Just where do they plan to get it from?" "Where indeed? The villains are onto something that could make them a fortune, far more than they get from their usual crimes. What exactly they're onto, we're not sure, but it's vital that we stop them." "That's a pretty tall order, sir." "I know, but we have one firm lead. We think we know the identity of the gangster in charge of the money-making scheme. If we can catch him, the whole rotten plan will fall apart." Sir George opened a grey file and extracted a photograph, which he handed to Bill. Staring out at Bill was a sinister-looking man with long, black, greasy hair, tied in a ponytail at the nape of his neck. "His name's Leon Slade," said Sir George grimly. "He poses as a businessman, but he's one of the most evil men that's ever lived." "How long have we got?" said Bill. "A few days, maybe a week," said Sir George. "Here are today's Interpol reports. All the thefts committed in the last 24 hours. I've glanced through them, and I must say I can't see anything that would bring in the kind of money that those scoundrels need. Maybe you'll have better luck." "I hope so," said Bill, and began reading. It took him hours and hours to look through all the reports, but as his eyes scanned the final list, something caught his attention. He grabbed a yellow highlighter and scored through the words "Stolen, 12th century replica Roman galley, Houston, Texas." It tied in with something he'd noticed in yesterday's evening newspaper. A model ship in a bottle stolen from a London museum 2 days earlier. Why would anybody steal those old replica ships? They were too easily traceable to sell on. At Leon Slade's headquarters that same day, another smashed model ship lay on the floor amid the splinters of its glass bottle. Igor trembled as his boss rounded on him. "You fool!" Slade spat, flexing his bony hands. "Yes, boss," muttered Igor. "Sorry, boss. Next time. Next time? What makes you think there will be a next time?" "Oh, please, boss," Igor whimpered. "I know exactly where the last ship is. This has to be the one." "You've got one more chance, Igor. One more. And this time," hissed Slade, "I'm going with you." On board the cruise liner Erotica, Lucianne and Dinah were walking around the ship's souvenir shop. It was Jack's birthday the next day, and Lucianne still had to buy him a present. The shop wasn't very inspiring. It had shelves full of fluffy toys and bath salts with bows on, but nothing Jack would really like. "It's the same old stuff you buy everywhere," grumbled Lucianne. "Oh, hi, Ingrid." The friendly stewardess smiled at them. "Hi, you two," she said. "Spending all your money?" "There's nothing to spend it on," said Lucianne. "It's Jack's birthday tomorrow," explained Dinah, "but you can't find anything he'd like." "He likes computers," began Lucy, "and parrots, and—" "Don't you think he'd like something to do with the sea and sailing?" interrupted Ingrid. "Something to remind him of this trip." "Hey, that's an idea! I'd like to get him something different." "Well, tomorrow, where we stop, there's a wonderful nautical curiosity shop. I used to love going there when I was a little girl. I think it's still there." As soon as the boat docked the next day, Dinah and Lucy rushed off to find the shop Ingrid had described. Sure enough, just off the main square, there it was. "Come on," said Lucianne eagerly. "Let's go in." They tumbled through the tiny door of the shop and began gazing eagerly about them at all the shelves, groaning with nautical goods. "This is brilliant," said Dinah. Do you think Jack would like this sailor's hat? She tried it on.
Maybe. Hey, what about that old deep-sea diving helmet?
Oh, yes, breathed Dinah.
Just a minute,
said Lucy-Anne as she paused in front of a small Roman galley and a glass bottle.
This is beautiful.
She stooped and read the price tag.
And I can afford it. Just.
It's perfect, said Dinah. He'll love it. The assistant wrapped up the ship in a bottle carefully and put it in a sturdy paper bag. Then the girls piled out into the street, chatting happily, where they met up with Alison and the boys. Come on, now we're all together. Group photo, cried Dinah. As the four posed, laughing, two men walked behind them, just as Dinah clicked the shutter. Oh, bother, she said crossly. That's ruined it. I didn't see them coming. Never mind, said Alison. Time to get back to the ship. Minutes later, the two men, Slade and Igor, walked inside the nautical curiosity shop. Igor's howl of anguish shook the windows of the shop and terrified the shop assistant when he heard her news. You've just sold it, he roared. Slade leant over the counter and seized the shop assistant by the arm. Who to? He hissed. Slade and Igor ran out of the shop. It was easy to spot Lucy-Anne, as the bag she was holding had the shop's name printed on it in big red letters. Slade and Igor made a dash towards her, but the two villains could only watch helplessly as Alison, the four children, and the bag disappeared up the gangplank of the ship. Looks like they got away, boss, gulped Igor. Got away? Snarled Slade. I haven't even started yet. Here's what we're gonna do. Jack leant forward and blew out all the candles on his cake. Everyone sitting around the table cheered. Make a wish, cried Alison as Jack closed his eyes tight.
What have you wished for, Jack?
Said Lucy-Anne teasingly. That you get the biggest bit. Everyone laughed. In the corner of the ship's lounge, someone else was laughing too. It was Igor. Slade had ordered him to sneak aboard and steal the ship in a bottle. Dinah picked up Jack's new tennis bat. You've had some great presents, she said, but I like the ship in a bottle best. So do I, said Jack as he picked it up and turned it about in his hands, admiring it. You're a star, Lucy-Anne. Across the room, Igor's eyes narrowed with greed. Hey, said Jack as he examined the ship closely. There's a name on it, with funny writing. Let's see, said Dinah, leaning over. It's like the writing on Ingrid's pendant. She might know what it means. Let's ask her. Can we, Mum? All right, said Alison. Go on, but don't be long, or I'll eat all this cake myself. Laughing, the children scrambled out of the salon, Jack carrying the boat. Nobody noticed the bulky figure of Igor slipping out after them. The children found Ingrid setting the tables for the evening meal in the restaurant. Yes, it's certainly runic writing. I think it says Andrea. That's a very special name. Why? Asked Jack. It's from a famous story about a powerful Roman, the governor of these islands. He was a very greedy man, always stealing from the people. What did he do? Said Dinah. The children leaned closer to listen, and Jack put the boat on a nearby chair. Unnoticed, Igor had crept into the dining room behind the children and managed to maneuver his huge bulk under a table nearby. Well, he had a daughter, Andrea, an only child, and when she was going to be married, the Romans said that all the silver in the country must be given to him to be melted down into coinage for her wedding. All the silver, exclaimed Dinah. Every last little bit. He sent it on a ship to his daughter.
The ship was called the Andrea as well, but en route it was attacked by pirates.
Pirates! The children gasped and drew closer still. No one spotted the Hoover nozzle that was slowly snaking its way towards the chair with Jack's boat on.
Did they get the silver? Asked Lucy-Anne.
No, said Ingrid. The story goes that the pirates chased the ship around an island, but no one knows where. And the captain was clever. He got away and went into a little harbour, and there he left the silver with some men, and then he came out to fight. Behind the group, the Hoover nozzle had hooked the chair safely and was pulling it slowly and steadily towards the table under which Igor was crouched. And who won? Asked Philip. Well, no one. Both the ships sank and they all drowned. How awful! Exclaimed Lucy-Anne. And the treasure went missing, said Philip. It must have been worth a fortune. Millions, replied Ingrid, and no one has ever found it. Two large hands stretched from under the tablecloth. Stretched and reached. Right, said Alison, sweeping into the room and sweeping up the boat. I think it's time you lot went to bed. There was a chorus of groans as Alison hustled the children from the room. But they were nothing compared to the groan Igor let out when his hands closed on emptiness. A couple of hours later, the Erotica was sailing calmly on through the night. Alison had made a good-night call to Uncle Jos back home at Craggy Tops and was now tucked up in bed just like the children. Outside, in the corridor, a bulky figure was walking as quietly as he could. It was Igor. He decided on the cabin he wanted and silently opened the door. All he could see were the two boys, peacefully asleep, and the dim shape of Jack's ship in a bottle on the table between the beds. Igor aimed his torch straight at the model ship and, chuckling, crept between the two beds. Then he picked the bottle up. "Ah!" he bellowed. A small feathered demon, all beak and claws, had flown at him. He beat out at it, trying to protect his face, and dropped the bottle. It smashed on the floor. "Naughty boy! Naughty boy!" shrieked Kiki. In a complete panic, Igor fled. Startled out of sleep, Jack sat bolt upright in bed, just as the door slammed behind Igor. "My ship!" wailed Jack. Dumbly, the two boys stared down at all the broken glass on the floor and the model galley lying in the midst of it. "What happened?" said Philip. "Someone was here," Jack said hoarsely. "There was a man. He broke my ship." "Don't be daft," replied Philip calmly. "It was Kiki. She must have knocked it over." Suddenly the door was wrenched open and the silhouette of Alison appeared, hands on hips. The noise had awoken her. "What on earth are you two up to?" She started to walk towards them. "Mind the glass!" cried Jack. "It's all right, Mum, we'll clear it up," said Philip. "Kiki knocked over the bottle, that's all." "Honestly, that bird," grumbled Alison. "Just make sure you don't cut yourselves, all right?" She turned on her heels just as Dinah and Lucy-Anne appeared behind her. "Back, you two," she ordered. "Oh, Mum," wailed Dinah. "Well, 2 minutes then straight back to bed," Alison said, and stalked off. The girls went into the cabin. "What's going on?" said Dinah. "I'll see if there's a dustpan and brush in Ingrid's cupboard," said Philip, after he had explained. "What a shame!" exclaimed Lucy-Anne. "Bad Kiki." "Poor Kiki! Poor Kiki!" the parrot corrected her. Dinah picked up the ship from the floor and examined it. "Oh dear," she said, "it's got a split in its side." "Maybe I can fix it," said Jack. "Let me see." "Hang on," said Dinah. "There's something inside it." Meanwhile, Philip had discovered a dustpan in Ingrid's large cupboard next door. He'd also discovered Igor's hiding place. But he was completely oblivious to this second discovery because Igor's disguise was so good. "It's not my night," groaned Igor, as he pulled a large plastic bucket off his head and pushed away a wet mop. Then he eased his way over to the wall adjoining the boy's cabin, pressed a glass to his ear, and began to listen to what was happening next door. "I think it's a bit of paper," said Jack, frowning with concentration. "There!" Triumphantly, he pulled out a piece of parchment from the inside of the ship. The parchment was yellow with age and cracked and torn round the edges. "Wow!" breathed Philip. "What is it?" The parchment was divided unevenly into 4. In each of the 4 squares there was runic writing. The first square showed a coastline, an ancient pillar with a cross, and the drawing of a footprint with 6 lines above it and 5 alongside. The second square showed a smiling woman wearing a crown, surrounded by coins. The third square looked creepy. It was a great-eyed snake floating over the head of a monk. Then, in the last square, there was a boat. "That's your boat, Jack!" cried Philip excitedly. "Yes, and that must be Princess Andrea," said Lucy-Anne, pointing. "It's a map of some kind," added Dinah. "It must be coded instructions," breathed Jack. "Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking?" said Philip. And together the 4 shouted, "Treasure!" On the other side of the wall, Igor was nearly bowled backwards by the sudden loud shout from the children. Hastily, he pulled out his mobile phone and tapped in a number. "Hi, boss, it's me," he said into the mouthpiece. "It's definitely the one." At the other end of the line, Slade gripped his phone fiercely. "How do you know?" Igor swallowed painfully. "Because, boss, the kids have found the map." "They what?" Slade took a deep breath. His henchman may have strong muscles, but as for his brain... "Okay, stay there," he rapped out. "I'm on my way." Next morning, Dinah and Lucy-Anne went along to the boys' cabin to have a look at the treasure map by daylight. "I wonder where that coastline is," said Philip thoughtfully. "Could be anywhere," replied Dinah. "Could be somewhere around here." "Well, exactly. We could be sailing right past it." "Wherever it is, let's have a go at finding it," cried Philip. "What we should do is show the map to Ingrid," said Lucy-Anne. "That runic writing is just the same as the Andrea on the boat." "Good idea," said Jack. "After breakfast. Come on, hurry up or there won't be any cornflakes left." "Cornflakes?" started Dinah scathingly. Then she broke off. "Hey, do you hear that?" There was a distant whirring sound growing louder. "Sounds like a helicopter." "Perhaps it's landing someone on board." "They must be pretty important to have their own helicopter," said Philip. "Come on, let's go and see." The 4 children stood and stared as the helicopter landed on deck. Slade and a boy of about Philip's age got out. As he passed, the boy gave a half smile in their direction. The children watched as the man and the boy were escorted below, then hurried off to eat. Alison and the children were just finishing breakfast when the new arrivals walked into the dining room. Philip immediately nudged Dinah, who nudged Jack, who laughed, spilt his drink, and nudged Lucy-Anne. "All right, you lot," said Alison. "What's the big secret?" "They're the people the helicopter brought," explained Lucy-Anne. "That man looks really creepy," muttered Jack. "Jack, really?" remonstrated Alison as she stood up to go. As the 5 made their way to the door, Slade spun round and flashed his most sincere smile in their direction. "Hi," he said warmly. "The name's Marek Epelenska, and this is my son, Lucas." "Oh, hello. I'm Alison Mannering, and this is Dinah, Philip, Lucy-Anne, and Jack. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Epi Lenska. Hey, call me Epi. All my friends do. And Slade smiled again. Care to join us for a coffee? A short time later, they were all sitting in the dining room, drinking coffee and chatting. One reason we decided to come on this cruise is that it's Lucas's birthday next week, said Slade. Really? Said Dinah. That's a coincidence. It was Jack's birthday yesterday. No kidding. Hey, we missed Jack's birthday by 1 day, Lucas. Did you get some good presents? Asked Lucas. Yes, thanks, said Jack. I gave him a ship and a bottle, piped up Lucienne, but the bottle broke. Quickly, Jack nudged his sister's back. He didn't want her to give too much away. It broke? How terrible, said Slade. Was the ship damaged? No, the ship's fine, replied Jack. Lucas, you said you had some shopping to do, said Slade. Hey, would you kids show 'em where the shop is? Sure, said Dinah, getting to her feet. Let's go. The 5 children trooped out. Once inside the shop, Lucas quickly looked round and spotted a rack of T-shirts. Come on, everybody choose one, said Lucas as the children sorted through them. Dad won't mind. Dinah glanced at Philip, eyebrows raised. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah. Oh, and Jack, I have something else for you as well. Lucas pulled out a flashy-looking digital watch, all dials and buttons. It's one of the ones my dad sells. Happy birthday for yesterday. Wow, said Jack, his eyes lighting up. Thanks. Hang on, I'll just set the time, said Lucas, and he started pressing buttons. Good job Lucas is doing it for you, said Lucienne. It looks very complicated. Not really, replied Lucas. There. He handed the watch to Jack, who eagerly put it on. Up on deck, having said goodbye to his new friend Alison Mannering, Slade was pacing anxiously. In his epi disguise, the villain had been charming and friendly, and he soon knew all about Craggy Tops, Uncle Joss, the delayed wedding, everything. From his pocket he drew out a slim radio tracking device and smiled as he saw the winking light. Swiveling it round, he followed the direction of the pointing arrow, right into the path of the 5 children. Lucas had done his job. Just then Igor came running up. I searched the kids' cabins like you said, boss, but there was no map. Then they must be carrying it with them, hissed Slade. While Lucienne and Lucas were playing cards together in the sun lounge, Jack, Dinah and Philip chatted amongst themselves. So what do you think of him? Said Philip quietly, nodding at their new friend. Seems okay to me, replied Dinah. What do you think, Jack? Jack shrugged. I suppose he's all right. He's sticking around us a bit, though, and we need to get that map translated. Why don't we just slip away now and show the map to Ingrid? Dinah suggested. She's usually doing our cabins about this time. Good idea, said Philip. You two go ahead. I'll stay here and make sure that Lucas doesn't follow you. Dinah and Jack slipped quietly away and headed down to the cabin. Inside they found Ingrid and showed her the map. It's very old writing, like on the boat, but it's much more difficult. Sorry, but I've no idea what these words say, announced Ingrid finally. Oh well, said Jack. Thanks anyway, Ingrid. Dinah went back to tell Philip the bad news while Jack found himself a quiet table in the ship's coffee bar and sat down. He was determined to crack the map even if it took all morning. Jack glanced round to check no one was looking and pulled the map out of his pocket. He was too engrossed to notice a huge shadow fall over him from the window outside. Igor had been following him and had just caught his first sight of the much-hunted map. Ah! With a terrible roar of triumph, Igor slammed both huge hands onto the glass. Terrified, Jack shot to his feet and made a run for it. Igor charged into the coffee bar like an enraged bear. "Sir!" remonstrated the steward, but Igor knocked him aside like a rag doll and blundered after Jack. Heart hammering, Jack raced along the empty deck and clambered up some steel steps. Igor thundered after him, swiping at his legs from below. Jack raced on, up as far as he could go, onto a stretch of deck, and stopped. There was no exit. Threateningly, Igor closed in on him. "Give me the map," he growled. Jack held it tightly behind his back. "No! It's not yours! Leave me alone!" "It's not yours either!" shouted Igor, lunging at Jack. Suddenly a third figure erupted from the side, knocking Igor backwards and pinning his arms to his side. It was Slade. "It's okay, Jack," he yelled. "I'll handle this now." Jack didn't stop to ask questions. Gratefully, he shot down the stairs to freedom. "Boss!" groaned Igor. "I nearly had him." "You idiot!" hissed Slade. "You think I want the police crawling all over the ship?" "But, boss!" "Quiet! Just do exactly as I say." A little over an hour later, Igor was led in handcuffs off the Erotica and onto a waiting police launch. The children stood at the rails watching as he went. "Do you think we should tell Mum?" said Dinah. "No more adventures if we do," answered Philip. Then Slade and Lucas appeared beside them. "Jack, are you okay?" said Slade, all concern. "Fine, thanks, Eppie. Thanks for rescuing me like that. Who was he?" "Just some weird stowaway, I guess. What was that piece of paper he was after?" There was an awkward pause. Jack glanced quickly at Philip and said, "Oh, just something we found in that model ship that got broken." Slade shrugged and said, very casually, "Can I, have a look at it?" It's nothing," said Jack, stalling. "It doesn't make sense." "Maybe I could make some sense of it." Slowly, unsure, Jack started to pull the precious map out of his pocket. Slade leaned forward. Then... "There you are!" It was Allison. "I was wondering what had happened to you. What's all the commotion about?" "Eppie caught a stowaway," announced Lucy-Anne. Allison turned to Slade, impressed. "Really?" "Oh, please," protested Slade. "I just raised the alarm, that's all." "What's that you've got, Mum?" Allison was holding a piece of fax paper in her hand. "It's bad news, I'm afraid. Uncle Joss has had an accident. We've got to fly back." "Oh, no," said Philip. "Poor Uncle Joss." "What happened?" asked Dinah. "Is he bad?" Amid a flurry of concerned questions, Allison led the children to their cabins. Nobody noticed Slade smiling to himself as he watched them go. "I've never heard of the nursing home that sent the fax," Allison was saying a short time later. "They say Uncle Joss has broken his hip." "Can't you speak to him?" asked Philip. "Every time I phone, they say he's asleep, and I can't get hold of Bill. It's all very..." Suddenly there was a quick knock, and Slade popped his head round the door. "Hi, Eppie," said Allison. "I've been thinking," said Slade. "Why don't you leave the kids with us for a couple of days while you find out how Uncle Joss is? If it's serious, they can fly back. If it isn't, you come back." "Oh," began Allison. "That's very kind of you, but..." "Please, Mum," begged Philip. "Yes, go on, Mum," said Dinah as she raised her camera and snapped Slade's smiling face. "That's a great idea." But Alison still looked doubtful. "Oh, come on," said Slade persuasively. "What could possibly happen to them?" And he smiled steadily at Alison. "Oh, you're right," she answered. Early the next morning, the Erratica pulled into Anders Isle harbour, and the children said their goodbyes to Alison. "Now, I'll either see you in 2 days or I'll make arrangements for you to come home," Alison said as the ship's porter carried her bags down the gangplank. "Take care of yourselves and be good." "Say hello to Uncle Joss for us," said Philip. "Smile," said Dinah, aiming her camera. "Oh, drat! The film's run out." Alison smiled anyway as she got into the taxi. "Goodbye," she called. Lounging at the ship's rails, Slade and Lucas watched Alison and the children saying their goodbyes. Surreptitiously, Slade slipped a small packet into Lucas's hand. "Here. Bug their cabins while they're empty." Lucas scurried off. In the boys' cabin, Lucas found the perfect place for his listening bug, under the shade of the table lamp. Smirking, he left to bug the girls' room in the same place. After they'd waved off Alison, the 4 children gathered around Jack in the ship's library. Jack was using his portable computer to try and find a coastline that was an exact match for the coast shown in the mysterious map. If they could find a match, it might reveal where the treasure was hidden. "Hi, what are you doing?" asked a sudden and unwelcome voice. The children looked up, annoyed. Lucas had tracked them down yet again. Philip hastily snatched the treasure map up from the table and shoved it in his pocket. "Hi," said Dinah unenthusiastically. "Neat computer," remarked Lucas. The computer beeped urgently. "What's it doing?" asked Lucas, craning around to see the screen. Jack shrugged. "Oh, just my school geography project." A flashing message appeared on the screen. "Match found. Press enter." "I've had enough now." Jack reached quickly to switch it off. But Lucas was quicker. He leant over and pressed enter, saying, "Hang on! You'll lose the data if you switch it off now." Anders Isle and some statistics came up on the screen. Jack pushed Lucas's arm away and switched the computer off. "Anders Isle?" said Lucas. "That's where we are now, isn't it?" Dinah glared at Lucas. The atmosphere around the table, already tense, fairly crackled. "Is it?" said Jack irritably. "I wouldn't know." "Oh yes, I'm sure." Philip stood up. "Goodbye! Goodbye!" shrilled Kiki. And Lucas left. "I wish he'd leave us alone!" exploded Jack as the door closed. He switched the computer on again, tapped in an entry, and a map of Anders Isle appeared on the screen. "So, the cross marks the spot," said Philip. "Brilliant," said Lucienne. "Maybe we should ask Eppie to take us there." "Maybe," pondered Philip, "but we still don't know what the runic writing means. Let's keep it a secret for now." Just then, Ingrid walked into the library with a vase full of beautiful flowers. "What are you lot doing in here?" she said. "You should be outside in the fresh air." "We're reading about Anders Isle," explained Dinah. "Are you? I have a friend here who knows everything there is to know about Anders Isle. He's a priest, and he's also a bit of a scholar. He'd probably be able to help you with the writing on that old map of yours, too." "Oh, really?" said Philip eagerly. "Would he see us?" "I'm sure he would." Ingrid took pen and pad from her pocket and started scribbling. "His name's Owen Tornay. Here's his address. He lives just outside the port." "Thanks, Ingrid," cried Lucienne. "Wow," enthused Philip. "This guy could probably put the whole thing together for us." Back in wet and windy London, Bill was growing impatient. He strode into Sir George Houghton's office and demanded, "Any news, sir?" Sir George put down his cup of tea and picked up a document. "As a matter of fact, there is. We've found a reference in a 12th century chronicle. Saint Bragwain writes about a model galley recorded in the goods and chattels of an obscure monastic sect in the Channel Islands, supposed to be connected with some story about buried treasure or something. It could be our best lead." He looked up at Bill. "The Channel Islands? Isn't that where Alison and the children have gone?" "Well, yes, as a matter of fact it is." "Then why don't you go down there and check this out? And see Alison at the same time?" The 4 children left the ship and rented cycles at the local hire shop. After an hour's cycling, they had arrived at Owen Tournay's house and were now having tea in his delightful flower-filled garden. "It's nice of you to see us like this," said Philip. "Not at all," replied Owen. "Any friend of Ingrid is a friend of mine. Now, what is it you want to show me?" Jack picked up his PC and tapped in a command. The picture of the monk and the snake came up on the screen. "Could you tell us what the words mean?" he asked. Owen adjusted his glasses and concentrated on the screen. "This is very interesting. It says, 'The Guardian will show the way.'" A few more taps from Jack, and the picture of the princess was displayed. It says, 'Beware of the smiling princess.'" Next, Jack called up the picture of the ship. "This says, 'Turn the ship north.'" "What do these 2 symbols above the ship mean?" asked Philip. "That's the figure 7, and that's 5, said Owen. The children exchanged glances. Owen had translated the map for them, just as they had hoped. Back on the ship, Slade was growing impatient. At last he heard muffled noises through the radio transmitter. He listened to the children talking in the boys' cabin and rubbed his hands in anticipation. Kiki was overjoyed to see the children. Screeching, she launched herself so enthusiastically at Jack that she knocked the table lamp over. "What's going on?" muttered Slade. The radio transmitter had suddenly gone dead. He held it close to his ear and jumped back in pain as Kiki gave another high-voltage shriek. "Kiki, I'm sorry," Jack was saying soothingly. "We came back as soon as we could." "What's all the noise about?" asked Dinah as the girls appeared at the doorway. Philip stooped to pick up the lamp and stopped in his tracks. He'd seen the bugging device underneath the shade. "It's absolutely fine," he said slowly, putting his finger to his lips and then pointing urgently to the bug. Back in his cabin, Slade was wondering why everything had gone quiet. Philip had handed the lamp to Jack, who had detached the bugging device and was now busy working on it with a screwdriver, attaching a long piece of wire to it. Dinah was writing on a piece of paper, and Lucy Ann had gone to fetch the lamp from the girls' cabin, and discovered a bug on that too. Philip smiled and detached it from the shade as well. Then, with a flourish, Dinah gave her script to Philip. "Have you done it yet?" read Philip, speaking into the bug like a microphone. Then he handed the script and bug to Jack. "Yes," read Jack clearly. "You know the teddy bears in the shop? They haven't sold a single one during the whole cruise, so I've hidden the map in one of them." And he handed the bug to Dinah. "Sounds like a good place to me," read Dinah. Then she grinned, walked over to the porthole and dropped the bug through the gap. The smile faded from Slade's face when the children's conversation gave way to clatters and then watery gurgles. Impatiently, he grabbed a wad of money from his jacket and thrust it at Lucas, who had been sitting sulkily in the corner of the cabin. Go to the shop, boy. Get all those bears, every single one. Go on, quick. Lucas scarpered. "Now to find out who's really behind all this," said Jack as the 4 sped along to the shop. just in time to see Lucas hand a thick wad of notes to the startled shop assistant and start scooping up armfuls of bears.
Lucas, breathed Lucy Ann in disbelief.
Shh, warned Philip. The shop assistant, delighted with the huge sale, hurried to hold a large bag open for Lucas to drop the bears in. Then he left the shop, a bulging bag in either hand. Dinah nodded to Philip, who went one way with Lucy Ann. Then she and Jack dodged along the corridor behind Lucas. Lucas disappeared into Slade's suite and slammed the door shut. Outside, Dinah pressed her ear to the door.
I can't hear a thing, she whispered.
Grinning, Jack produced his computer from his pocket, with the wired bug attached. He carefully pushed the bugging device through the slats in the air vent and into Slade's room.
Words began to appear on the PC screen. This is the last bear. All empty. Are you sure you got them all? Positive. I think they're onto you.
There was a pause. Inside the room, Slade had grabbed the phone and punched in a number. Then the screen spelt out, "It's me. Change of plans. We're going after the treasure now. You can start buying the guns in 48 hours.
Guns,
breathed Jack. Swiftly, he pulled the bugging device out through the air vent and he and Dinah sped away.
It's Eppie,
hissed Jack as they collided with Lucy Ann and Philip in the doorway to the boys' cabin.
He's behind everything. He wants the treasure to buy guns, squealed Dinah. We've got to get away and find the treasure before he does.
It was a race against time. The children had to leave the ship before he realized what they were up to.
We can hide near town overnight and bike overland tomorrow, said Jack.
And if they follow us, asked Philip,
we'll be okay. They can't cover all the roads.
Come on then, let's leg it. As Jack slung his rucksack across his back, he didn't notice his computer slide out of a side pocket and fall on the bed. The four children raced from the room and down the corridor, Kiki flapping along beside them. Suddenly, the horrible face of Slade appeared behind them at the end of the corridor.
It's Eppie! Run! ordered Philip.
Slade started to give chase. The four turned and hared up some stairs. And there was Igor. He roared at them, grabbing at Philip. Philip barged him off, and just as Igor lunged at Jack, Kiki flew up from behind, screeching. Igor battered the bird away as they ran past, racing for the gangplank. On the quay, the children leapt on their bikes. Slade and Lucas rushed to the ship's railings just in time to see them make their escape.
They're getting away, cried Lucas.
Don't worry, we've still got the tracker, smiled Slade. For the first 15 minutes, the children cycled hell for leather. Then Philip turned sharply and led them off the main road and along a rough track.
I'm sure they're not behind us, said Jack, peering over his shoulder. So can we slow down? Panted Lucy Ann.
No, barked Philip. Then he veered off onto another intersecting lane and shot through some dense trees. 10 hard-cycled minutes more, and he allowed everyone to slow down. Jack made constant reference to the map and his compass, shouting out directions to Philip at the front. Only when it had really got too dark to see did he agree to stop for the night. Next morning, the children made an early start and cycled for 2 long hours without a single break. Eventually, Jack pulled up to check the map and the compass. "We'll have to leave the road here and walk," he announced. There was a general groan. "Are you sure, Jack?" asked Philip. "That map's very old." "It was accurate enough for the computer," Jack retorted. "We have to go over those hills and down to the coast."
"Hills," moaned Lucy Ann. "I'm tired."
"Come on," said Dinah. "Let's hide the bikes in that hedge there and get going." The children had no idea that back on the ship, thanks to the tracker, Slade knew exactly where they were. As soon as Bill's plane landed, he took a taxi to Anders Isle port. The Erotica was still in dock.
He ran up the gangplank and the steward directed him to Alison's cabin. Ingrid was in there, changing the linen, and explained what had happened. Bill found that the girls' cabin was empty, as was the boys'. Knowing the children's natural ability to attract trouble, he was worried. Frantically, he started to search the top of the desk. "What are you looking for?" asked Ingrid. "I was hoping they'd left a note," Bill answered. "You say you haven't seen them since yesterday afternoon." He pulled open the desk drawer and discovered the photographs that Dinah had had developed from her first film. He fanned them out, looking at the happy record of the first days of the cruise. "That's odd," said Ingrid. "Jack's left his PC." Then she glanced at Bill's face. He was staring in horror at a photo of Leon Slade. A jolly, smiling photo. Not at all like the sinister picture he'd been shown by Sir George. "Who's this?" he rasped. "Oh, that's Mr. Epilenska," said Ingrid. "Well, what's wrong?" White-faced, Bill seized Jack's PC and tapped in a command. The coastline appeared on the screen. Then the smiling princess. "At least they've left me a clue," muttered Bill under his breath. Bill was racing down the gangplank just as Alison was running from her taxi towards the ship. She had been all the way back to Craggy Tops only to find Uncle Joss fit and well and wondering why she hadn't phoned. Wondering what on earth was going on, she'd immediately returned to the ship. "Bill!" she shouted, flabbergasted. "What are you doing here? Where are the children?" "The kids are in danger," he said as he caught her hand, "but I think I know where they've gone. Taxi!" On the other side of the island, the children had now been walking for so long that Kiki had got fed up and decided to fly off on her own. Jack went back to look for her. He stopped beneath where she was perched in a tree and called up. "Come on, Kiki! Come down!" With a flutter of white wings, she was on his shoulder. "Naughty girl," he said fondly, stroking her. Then suddenly he froze. He'd heard Slade's voice. "This way! We must be nearly on top of them." Jack crouched lower, heart pounding. They had been followed after all. "How do they know where we are, Kiki?" he whispered. Then his watch beeped. "Of course," he said. "It's a transmitter." Quickly, he undid the strap and held the watch out to Kiki. "Pick it up," he urged her. She leant forward obediently and took it in her beak. "Good girl, Kiki. Now fly!" A few hundred meters away, Slade's eyes widened in disbelief as the arrow on the tracker swiveled wildly. "Over there!" he shouted. "No! That way! Quick!" Igor shambled off. Jack came hurtling back towards the others, shouting, "Quick! They've been following us!" "What?" "That watch Lucas gave me. It had a tracking device in it. I've delayed them, but we've got to go." "How have you—" began Diana. "No time," panted Jack. "I'll tell you later. Hurry!" Away in the forest, Kiki was still leading Slade and his henchmen on a wild goose chase. Or perhaps wild parrot chase is a better description. From tree to tree she flew, up and down, back and round, while the men swerved and panted beneath her. "Are you sure that thing's working properly?" groaned Igor. "Of course it is," snapped Slade. "Over here." He glared down at the tracker. Its bleeper was right on their position. Then it went right. Then it went left. Slowly, Slade looked upwards. There was Kiki, watching her beak, doing a little dance on the branch above them. "Back!" yelled Slade, bright red with rage. "Back the way we came!" "Naughty boy!" shrilled Kiki with delight. The children at last reached the shoreline shown in the map. All they could hear was the sound of the waves breaking on the beach and seagulls crying above their heads. Jack raised his binoculars and scanned the beach in front of them. "There it is," he said excitedly. "There's the cross." "Clever girl,"
Clever girl.
Kiki swooped from the sky and landed on Jack's arm, nuzzling him affectionately. Kiki, you're back, he cried. Yes, you are a clever girl. Come on then, said Dinah. Let's take a closer look. The cross leaned at a crazy angle in the sand and was hung with seaweed from when high tides had covered it. Next to it was an old, crumbling column. There was an ominous atmosphere to the whole place. Kiki wasn't fazed, however. She flew perkily off to the column and perched on the edge. The 4 children crowded round as Jack opened out the old map. "What's this foot sign?" said Dinah, pointing. "And these marks? Could they be clues?" "It's obvious," retorted Philip. "It's the number of steps to take." "It looks like 6 forward and 5 across," commented Lucienne. "But what if it's 5 forward and 6 across?" put in Jack. The children all began counting out the correct number of steps. It was Lucienne who found it first. "Here's something!" she shouted, crouching down and scrabbling at the ground. Buried in the sand was a strange circular slab of rock with runic symbols carved on it. It seemed to be set into a square of rock beneath it. "Those symbols are on the map too," breathed Dinah. "Turn the ship north," quoted Jack. "Look, the symbol for turn is the same. But turn what?" "The whole thing," suggested Philip. "Here goes." Using all his strength, Philip tried to twist the stone, but it didn't budge. "Try the other way," suggested Jack. 4 hands pushed, and slowly, slowly, the stone twisted round. For a second or so there was silence. Then, from behind them came a grating, grinding, rumbling noise. Kiki squawked and flew upwards. "Something's happened in the column," said Dinah. The 4 ran over and reached the column just as Kiki returned and swooped down into it. And disappeared. "The bottom's opened up," shouted Lucienne. "Look, there are steps. They lead down. This must be it." "So what are we waiting for?" said Dinah. The children switched on their torches and climbed down gingerly, step by step. They found themselves in a dark, low-ceilinged cavern. Shadows moved on the walls, looming over them. There was an ancient, brooding feel to the place. "Creepy," muttered Lucienne. Philip trained his torch across the floor, and a mysterious blue-black light flickered back at him. "Don't move," he hissed. "Water!" They shone their torches downwards. A circular pool filled the floor of the cavern, lapping at its walls. The water looked black, as though it went down forever. Its surface moved slightly, sending weird rippling shadows across the cavern ceiling. "Wow," muttered Jack. "I don't like the look of that." On the other side of the pool was an arched doorway. It was obviously the only way forward. "We've got to cross," said Philip. "There must be a way." The children played their torches all round the cavern, across the rough stone walls. Lucienne's torch beam landed on a skull set into the rock, and she gave a shrill shriek. Next to the skull was a painted fresco of a monk, glimmering in the uncertain light. "Look!" cried Jack. "It's exactly the same as the one on the map." "He's walking on water," said Dinah. "And there's the snake next to him. This must be the Guardian," added Philip. "Owen said the Guardian would show the way," mused Jack. Dinah glanced back up at the fresco on the wall. Then she stared at the water that almost reached her feet. There, emerging from the pool, was a painting of a snake's head. Its tongue seemed to be pointing at her. "Walking on water," she muttered to herself. "Well, here goes." And she stepped forward into the pool. "No, Dinah!" shouted Philip, horrified. "Stop!" But Dinah took a step forward. And another. Everyone watched in amazement as she glided safely across the pool and reached the entrance at the other side. "How did you do that?" gasped Jack. "Oh," breathed Lucy-Anne, "it's the snake." "You got it," exclaimed Dinah, turning round triumphantly. "Stepping stones, just below the surface, in the pattern of the snake." One by one, Philip, Lucy-Anne and Jack safely crossed the pool. Then the 4 children took a deep breath and stepped through the archway beyond. They found themselves at the mouth of a long, gloomy tunnel. At the far end, they stepped out into a large cavern, high-ceilinged and spacious. A great cross was suspended at the far end. "This must be where the monks lived," said Jack. Philip led the others through an ornate archway into a small chapel. The air felt stale and dead. "Look, more ancient wall paintings," said Dinah, heading over to examine them. "Hey, look at this!" Jack cried. He stepped through a tiny doorway into a room that seemed to be carved out of solid rock. Philip and Lucy-Anne followed him. In the centre of the room was a marble tomb, with runic letters and symbols of coins painted along its side. "Just like the signs on the map," whispered Lucy-Anne. "And look," said Jack, moving to the end. "Here's the princess, and she's smiling." Philip stared at the princess. Her smile seemed menacing, gloating. "Didn't the map say, 'Beware the smiling prince'?" he began. Suddenly the wall at the side seemed to swing out towards them. It was a door, and it was shutting fast. As it closed, it revealed a skeleton slumped on the ground. Lucy-Anne's scream echoed piercingly around the walls. "We're trapped!" she wailed. Panic-stricken, Philip and Jack started to bang furiously on the stone door. "Dinah, open the door! It won't move!" Dinah, on the other side, heard the banging, muffled by thick stone. Hearing the cries, she barged the door with her shoulder. To her relief and amazement, it swung in, and Philip, who'd been charging it from inside, stumbled out. "Oh, thank goodness!" cried Lucy-Anne, rushing out and hugging Dinah. "I thought we'd have to stay there forever." "Like he did," finished Jack grimly, nodding towards the sprawling skeleton. Kiki didn't like dark places. As soon as she'd seen Jack disappear through the arch on the other side of the pool, she'd turned tail and flown back up the column steps. Now she was perched on its rim. Not too far away, Slade and his little group had been desperately trying to track the children without the electronic device. Quite by chance, they had ended up in roughly the right area. Suddenly, Eagle gave a triumphant shout. "Boss! There's that dumb bird of theirs!" "Come on," yelled Slade. "If there are birds here, then they can't be far." In the princess's tomb, the children paced about, searching for clues. Lucy-Anne picked up the edge of an old black cloth draped over the altar, sneezing as the clouds of dust got in her nose. And there, underneath, was a stone statue of the Andrea, exactly like Jack's model boat. "I found it!" she called, her eyes wide with excitement. "Look, look! It's the ship!" "The treasure must be behind it, or in it," said Jack as the 3 rushed over. "Turn the ship north," quoted Lucy-Anne. "That's what the map said." "But how?" said Dinah. "It's not a real ship." "No, but if you turn a ship, you use the tiller," suggested Jack. "Let's have a go then," said Philip. He grasped the statue's tiller and hauled. A deep, thrilling, rumbling sound echoed round the chapel. Then, with a roaring, grinding noise, the entire altar swung back and revealed a small chamber behind it. But the children's amazement turned to bitter disappointment as they peered into the little stone room. "It's empty," wailed Dinah. "We've come all this way for nothing." Behind them in the underground tunnels, Slade and his henchmen had reached the black pool. Slade was shining his torch directly in the water, by the snake's head. He liked snakes. He could just make out the shape of one glimmering below the surface of the water. He guessed that that was the way across, but just to make sure he was right... "Igor," he barked, "get over here." The four children could just squeeze into the empty chamber behind the altar. Disconsolately, they sat on the floor as Jack studied the treasure map once again. "Someone must have got here before us," said Lucy-Anne sadly. "That's the only explanation." "But what about the numbers 7 and 5? Asked Jack. "We haven't, used them yet. They must be still to come." Philip shrugged. Could be anything. From above, a drop of water fell on his neck, and he shone his torch up at the ceiling. The ceiling was composed of rows of small square stones, each one green with slime and lichen. "Wait a minute," said Jack, his eyes following the beam of Philip's torch. Dinah clapped her hands. "That's what 7 and 5 are. It's a grid." "Dinah, you're brilliant," said Jack. "We count down 7 on one side and 5 along the other." "And push that stone or pull it out," added Philip excitedly. Then he started to count along the stones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. "OK, now go back," said Lucy-Anne. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counted Philip. He pressed hard on the stone he'd reached and tried to shift it with his fingernails, but it wouldn't budge. There was a disappointed silence. Then Dinah said, "OK, now try the other way." This time Jack reached up to count, in the other direction to Philip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he said, his voice hoarse with tension. 1, 2, 3, 4... He turned to look at the others. This was it. 5, he said, and pressed with all his might on the square. Immediately, the stone loosened, and then there came a glorious flood of shiny silver coins. The children cheered and clapped and laughed. It was like the best fruit machine in the whole world. "The Andrea treasure!" shrieked Lucy-Anne. "And we found it!" crowed Philip. "And I am so grateful for your help," hissed a malevolent voice. As one, the children spun round to see Slade grinning in the doorway. Bill and Alison's taxi hurtled around a dangerous curve on the cliff-top road. Bill sat in the back seat working intently on Jack's computer. Finally satisfied that he knew where the children were heading, Bill pulled out his mobile phone and pressed the code that got him a direct line to Sir George Houghton. He told him the grim news. "We've located them, sir," he said, describing the grid reference. "How long will it take the Secret Service boys to get there?" There was a pause as Bill listened, frowning. Then he rapped out, "That's too long, sir. I'm going in by myself." "No," corrected Alison as Bill turned off the phone. "We're going in." Bill glanced up at her. He never argued with Alison when she looked that determined. No one did. The children could only watch Slade helplessly as Igor tied them up with thick rope. The sinister villain turned to the sack he'd been shoveling the silver coins in, picked a coin up and kissed it lovingly. "Beautiful condition," he murmured, "and each one worth a fortune." "What are you going to do with us?" demanded Philip, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nothing," Slade shrugged. "You're going to stay here forever." "You're a murderer!" shrieked Dinah. "And tie Lucas up with the others," rapped out Slade. "What?" Lucas turned white. "But you promised me you'd stop blackmailing my father if I helped you." "Did I?" said Slade in mock surprise. "I can't remember saying that." He turned to Igor and the henchman. "Now come on, get all this stuff out of here." Igor chuckled as he quickly tied a rope round Lucas, pinning his arms to his sides, and manhandled him into the treasure vault with the others. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Slade with a flourish, "it's been a pleasure doing business with you. And now we must depart. Igor?" "Ah," grunted Igor, catching hold of the tiller on the stone ship. "No!" shouted Philip, panic-stricken. "Don't!" Igor heaved on the tiller. With a sickening grinding noise, the altar slowly swung back into place towards the terrified children. Lucy-Anne watched in horror as she saw the edge of the door moving slowly inwards. Another few centimeters and they would all be trapped forever. Wildly, she looked around for escape and spotted at her feet the stone that had fallen from the roof. She nudged it with her foot into the narrow gap. The door swung a little further and stopped, jammed. "Well done, Lucy-Anne!" exclaimed Philip. "We've got to get these ropes off," said Jack quickly. "My knife's in my back pocket." Philip twisted round and eased the fingers of his bound hands into Jack's pocket. Opening the knife with some difficulty, he started to saw at Jack's ropes. Soon all 5 children were free. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. "Right," said Philip determinedly. "Push!" Gradually, grindingly, the altar stone began to move. "Freedom!" breathed Jack. Before anyone else could move, Lucas pushed his way past Lucy-Anne and rushed to the door of the chapel. "Stop, Lucas!" shouted Philip. "Lucas, stop!" The boy ran on. Philip tore after him and tackled him, bringing him to the ground. Then he sat on him so he couldn't move. "What's the idea?" panted Philip. "What are you doing?" "I'm gonna get him," spat Lucas furiously. "He lied to me." "You won't stand a chance against those hired thugs of his. You'll get killed," said Philip. "Getting angry won't help. Getting even will." Lucy-Anne appeared behind them. "Quick!" she called excitedly. "In here! I've got an idea!" To move all of the treasure, Slade had organized his henchmen into a human chain through the tunnel and across the pool. They started to toss the sacks of coins one to the other. Come on, muttered Slade. "Speed it up." He didn't like the cavern. The watery light from the pool made everything look so eerie. And then, the most chilling noise split the still air. It was thin, wailing, inhuman. "What was that?" breathed Slade. Everyone stood still and listened. The wailing came again, a little louder this time, a little more sinister. "Think it's those kids?" muttered Igor. "Can't be," said Slade. The ghostly noise came again, echoing round the cavern. "Check it out," ordered Slade. "Move, move." Igor pushed one of the henchmen ahead of him. There was no way he was going first along that tunnel. Slowly the men edged into the tunnel, as the wailing seemed to grow louder and more close at hand. "Find out what's making the noise," snapped Slade. "And if it's that bird, smash it." Kiki, who had been hiding in the tunnel out of sight, chose that moment to fly straight at Slade's face. He jumped backwards, nearly overbalancing into the pool. "Hurry up, you idiots!" he yelled frantically. "Where are you?" Suddenly, Igor and the two hired thugs erupted from the tunnel, and behind them, glowing in the half-light, was a grinning skeleton wrapped in a black cloak. Slowly, it raised its bony hand and pointed at Igor. Then it made a sudden rush. With a cry of terror, Igor plunged into the pool, followed by the henchman. Slade panicked. He turned to grab a sack, meaning to escape with it, but Kiki landed on it with a blood-curdling shriek. Furiously, Slade raised his hand to strike. "Hold it! You're under arrest!" Slade looked up to see Bill, gun pointing straight at him. I'll give you half," Slade said desperately. Bill's frown deepened. "3/4. Please, just let me keep some of it." "Where you're going," said Bill, "you won't need a penny." Allison glared at the man who had tricked her, who had endangered her children. "Oh, you're too harsh, Bill," she mocked. "Why not let him have one bag?" And, Picking up a sack from the floor, she hurled it as hard as she could straight at Slade's chest. He caught it with a great gasp and toppled over into the black pool below. "Silly Billy! Silly Billy!" cackled Kiki in delight. Across the pool, the skeleton waved happily and dropped its cloak to the ground to reveal the children. Lucian's idea had worked brilliantly. They'd taken the skeleton from the princess's chamber and wrapped it in the cloth from the altar. That, coupled with some ghostly wailing from Dinah and Lucas, had been enough to scare the villains senseless. Sir George's Secret Service men arrived on the scene soon after, and the 4 wet and dispirited villains were handcuffed and taken off to jail. Lucas was driven away, back to his father, with a promise that the cloud his family had lived under for so long because of Slade's blackmailing would at last be lifted. The next day was one of those soft September days that seem to hold all the warmth of the summer in them. A wedding party had gathered in Owen Tournay's beautiful garden. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Owen announced, beaming happily. "You may kiss the bride." Eyes shining, Bill bent and kissed Alison, and the children all cheered. Then Alison drew back and looked serious. "Right, you lot," she announced. "I've got something to say to you." "Yes, Mum?" asked Philip. She had her stern face on again, the face no one dared argue with. "No more adventures. Understood?" "Yes, Mum," answered Philip obediently. "No more adventures." "Definitely no more adventures," added Jack. "Not a single one," put in Lucianne. "Wouldn't dream of it," cried Dinah. Alison frowned at them all jokingly. What were they up to? They weren't usually this compliant. She couldn't see that behind their backs, each and every one had firmly crossed their fingers.